June 27, 1944. Saipan. 1,430 hours. The sky above the island is a haze of smoke, drifting like torn black cloth over burning palms and shattered bunkers. The rumble of naval guns still echoes across the coastline, a low rolling thunder that refuses to fade. And then, out of nowhere, comes the faint hum of a single Mitsubishi A6M0. Not diving. Not attacking. Not fleeing. Just, gliding. American Marines at the western perimeter look up in disbelief. A lone Japanese fighter, wings steady, engine coughing but alive, descending in a slow, almost peaceful arc. No escort. No formation. No desperation of a kamikaze run. Just a controlled descent, like a man landing after a long, exhausting journey. The Marines scramble behind sandbags, rifles raised. A zero landing intact. Impossible. Every Japanese pilot is trained to die before surrender. But the plane doesn't break away. Doesn't turn toward fuel dumps or artillery positions. It simply circles once, then eases toward an abandoned sugar field flattened by shellfire. The wheels touch. Bounce. Then roll over the dirt, kicking up brown dust until the aircraft shudders to a stop. Silence. Even the gulls hovering over the shoreline seem to pause. You can almost feel the tension tightening the air as Marines close in, rifles trained on the cockpit canopy. Everyone expects the same thing. A pistol. A grenade. A suicidal final act. Instead, the canopy slides open, and a young Japanese pilot slowly rises, hands shaking, palms empty, lifted high above his head. His flight suit is dusty, but clean. His face is pale, but calm. A white cloth hangs from his belt, a makeshift flag of surrender. For a moment, nobody moves. This has never happened before. The pilot speaks in a hoarse voice. 3 English words, practiced, trembling, but unmistakably clear. No more death. Marines glance at each other, stunned. Is this a trap? A distraction? Another trick pulled from the caves and tunnels Japan has carved deep into the volcanic rock? But the young aviator keeps his hands raised high. And as 2 Marines cautiously approach, they see something strange in his eyes, not fear, not hatred. But exhaustion. A man who looks like he's already seen the end. A man who knows Japan is finished. A man who has chosen surrender over the Emperor's command to fight to the last. But why now? Why him? Why land intact, when every other pilot chooses fire over capture? The answer is still inside that zero. And what the Marines discover next will change the entire course of the battle for Saipan. The morning he surrendered was not planned, not ordered, and not written in any war manual. It was an act no Japanese pilot was ever expected to take, and yet, it was the only choice that could save hundreds, even thousands. For 3 days, Lieutenant Masato Kanda had flown above the Pacific skies with a single burden. He knew the war was lost, and another airstrike on the American supply convoy would trigger a brutal chain reaction, a counterattack that would completely wipe out the civilians hidden inside the island caves. He had seen what total war looked like. He had watched villages burn, heard the cries of families caught between empires, and felt the crushing weight of duty twisting into guilt. And so, at dawn, instead of rising with his squadron, he rose alone. He removed the imperial headband he had worn since training, folded it with trembling hands, and placed it inside his flight jacket, not as a symbol of honor, but as a reminder of the lives he still hoped he could protect. Then he stepped out of the abandoned lookout post, unarmed, holding nothing but a white cloth torn from his own uniform. Every step toward the American lines felt like walking through the barrel of a loaded rifle. He expected a shot at any moment. But he kept walking. The Marines watched a lone Japanese pilot emerge from the trees, not charging, not ambushing, but approaching with slow, deliberate footsteps. No one understood why he came. No one knew he carried information that could stop an entire battle. No one knew he was risking execution by both sides, his own for betrayal, and the enemy for deception. Yet he walked anyway, because surrendering alone was the only way left to save the innocent. The Marines didn't rush him. They didn't lower their rifles either. A lone Japanese pilot walking into enemy lines was never a simple thing. It could be a trap, a diversion, or a suicide ruse. On Saipan and Iwo Jima, men had watched enemies fake surrender, only to detonate grenades hidden in their sleeves. So they formed a semicircle around him. Silent. Frozen. Waiting. Lieutenant Masato Kanda stopped 10 paces away, lifted both hands, and spoke the only English he knew. No fight. Important. His voice cracked. Not with fear, but with urgency. The Marines seized him, searched him, and found no explosives, no hidden blade. Only a folded headband, and a hand-drawn map. They dragged him to the nearest command post, a sandbagged dugout where radios crackled and sweat dripped down helmets. Captain Robert Halsey, a hardened officer who had seen too many tricks, didn't offer a seat. "Talk," he barked. Kanda placed the map on the table. His hands were steady now, steadier than they had been in weeks. He tapped a point along the ridge. "Caves, full. Not soldiers. Families." Halsey frowned. Every bit of intelligence the Americans had said those caves were fortifications, firing positions, ammunition dumps, defensive choke points. But Kanda shook his head. He drew circles on the map. Dozens of them. Then he whispered something no Japanese officer would ever admit. "Japan, finish. War, finish soon. They die for nothing." A hush fell over the room. Because the Americans knew what came next in battles like this. Flamethrowers. M2 canisters turning tunnels into ovens. It was the fastest way to clear resistance, and the most horrifying. Kanda reached into his jacket and placed a small wooden tag on the table, a civilian registration tag from the island. He had taken it during a supply flight 2 weeks earlier. He had kept it because he couldn't forget the face of the child who wore it. Now it was his final plea. "Please, don't burn." For the first time in the entire Pacific campaign, an enemy pilot wasn't asking for mercy for himself. He was begging for mercy. For people he couldn't save any other way. Captain Halsey exhaled slowly. A decision hung in the air, one that could change the entire battle. But before he responded, a radio operator burst into the room, shouting. "Sir, our scouts report the caves are lighting signal fires." Everyone turned to Kanda. He didn't blink. "They wait for rescue," he said. Then his voice dropped to a chilling whisper. But rescue will never come." The Americans realized the truth. Japan was abandoning these civilians. And Kanda was the only man brave enough, or desperate enough, to betray his orders to save them. Halsey leaned forward, eyes locked on the pilot. "Then tell me," he said. "What do we do next?" Kanda swallowed. And answered. The next words he spoke would determine the fate of 1,000 lives. Captain Halsey didn't look away from Kanda, not even for a second. Outside, the jungle wind rattled palm leaves like bones. Inside, every man in the dugout leaned forward, waiting to hear what impossible plan a surrendered Japanese pilot thought he could offer the U.S. Marines. Kanda took a breath, steady and deliberate. He pointed again at the map, his finger tracing the twisting ridgelines and shadowed valleys where the caves lay hidden. "They trust pilots," he said. "They know my voice." A murmur ran through the Americans. Using a Japanese officer, to talk other Japanese out of fighting? In the Pacific? Unthinkable. But Kanda wasn't talking about persuading soldiers. He tapped the cave clusters again. "Not army," he repeated softly. "Civilians. Many." Halsey raised an eyebrow. How many? Kanda hesitated. His jaw tightened. 1,000, maybe more. The dugout fell silent. That number was too large to ignore, even for hardened men who'd survived Saipan's worst carnage. Marines who had stormed beaches where the sand felt alive with gunfire, who'd seen what Japanese commanders ordered civilians to do when cornered. It wasn't surrender. It was suicide. Whole families leaping from cliffs because they were told Americans would torture them. Kanda lifted his eyes. If you attack, he said. They burn. Or jump. The words landed like artillery. Halsey rubbed a hand over his face. So you're suggesting, he said slowly, that you walk up to these caves alone, and tell them to come out. Kanda nodded once. Halsey stared at him. You know that's a good way to get shot. A faint smile crossed Kanda's face, the weary smile of a man who had already made peace with death. The ridge was unnervingly quiet. Too quiet. No gunfire. No shifting rocks. No voices. Just the humid Pacific heat pressing down like a hand on the back of Kanda's neck as he stepped into view of the cave mouths. The Marines stayed low behind him, rifles half-raised, flamethrower teams frozen mid-stance, waiting. One wrong move, one hidden sniper, one sudden shout. And this entire humanitarian gamble would collapse in gunfire. Kanda felt every eye on him. American, and Japanese. He stopped just 20 paces from the nearest cave entrance, a jagged black opening that looked more like a wound than a shelter. He raised the loudspeaker with both hands. It trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the crushing weight of what he was about to attempt. His voice cracked once before it steadied. This is Lieutenant Masato Kanda, of the Imperial Japanese Navy. The words echoed across the ridge, deeper into the tunnels. Movement flickered in the darkness. Helmet silhouettes. The glint of bayonets. Eyes watching him with the suspicion of cornered animals. But Kanda kept speaking. To those inside. I know what you were told. I know what the officers commanded. But the situation has changed. A whisper drifted from the cave, a child's voice asking a question he couldn't hear. That sound alone nearly broke him. He continued. The battle is lost. Japan has no more ships coming. No more planes. No reinforcements. His throat tightened. You have done your duty. You have honored your ancestors. Now, save your children. Something shifted in the cave. Not hostility, uncertainty. Kanda stepped closer. The Marines tensed, fingers brushing triggers. But he didn't stop. I surrendered because I saw no future in death. I saw a future only if someone, one person, chose life first. His voice lowered, as if speaking directly to the hearts buried inside the earth. I choose life. And I ask you, for the sake of the innocent, choose it too. For the first time, someone answered. A wavering, elderly voice, cracked by hunger and fear. Lieutenant, is it true? The Americans, they will not harm us. Kanda bowed deeply toward the cave. They will treat you as human beings. Because that is what you are. From behind the Marines, Captain Halsey's jaw tightened. No one had ever spoken to Japanese civilians like this during the Pacific War. A long, suffocating silence followed. Then, a small hand appeared. A child stepped out first, barefoot, shaking, clutching a cloth doll. Every Marine froze. A second later, her mother emerged behind her, tears streaking down a face caked in ash. She held a white scrap of cloth up high. The universal signal. Surrender. Behind them, more figures appeared, old men, exhausted women, infants wrapped in blankets made of torn uniforms. They weren't soldiers. They were survivors. And they were coming out. One by one. Then dozens. Then hundreds. Kanda lowered his head and exhaled, not in triumph, but in relief so deep it made his knees buckle. The gamble had worked. But as he steadied himself, a shadow moved deeper inside the cave, someone still hidden, someone still dangerous. A lone figure stepped forward. And he was carrying a rifle. The Marines lifted their weapons instantly. Kanda raised a hand. Because he recognized the man. It was someone he had once served under, someone who believed dying for the Emperor was the only honor left. Someone who might undo everything. The moment tilted on a knife's edge. The man stepped fully into the light. Tattered uniform. Bloodshot eyes. A bandaged arm still oozing through the cloth. And in his hands, a Type 99 Arisaka rifle, barrel aimed not at the Marines. But at Kanda. The civilians behind him froze. Mothers pulled children close. Old men bowed their heads as if accepting what was about to happen. Kanda didn't move. He knew this man. Captain Hiroshi Tanaka, a fanatic by training, a purist by doctrine. Once a respected officer, now reduced to a ghost haunting the tunnels. Tanaka's voice sliced through the humid air. Traitor. The word wasn't shouted. It was whispered, quiet, cold, venomous. The Marines raised their rifles instantly. Flamethrower teams flicked off the safety caps. One order from Halsey and the caves would ignite, again. But Kanda lifted his hand slightly, a silent plea for them to hold. Tanaka took a shaky step forward. You shame the Emperor, he hissed. You shame the fallen. You would lead these people into the arms of the enemy? Kanda met his stare. I would lead them away from death. Tanaka's jaw clenched so hard a vein pulsed in his neck. There is only honor in dying for Japan. Kanda's voice softened. Is there honor in taking children with you? For a moment, Tanaka trembled, rage mixing with doubt. His grip tightened around the rifle until his knuckles whitened. The Marines shifted nervously. Halsey whispered through his teeth. Kanda, don't push him. But this was the moment Kanda had feared from the beginning. He took one slow step toward Tanaka. Then another. Tanaka raised the rifle higher, now aimed at Kanda's chest. Kanda stopped just a few paces away and spoke so quietly that only Tanaka could hear. We were trained to die. But no one taught us how to live. Something cracked deep inside Tanaka's expression, not physically, but spiritually. The kind of fracture that comes when a lifetime of indoctrination collides with a single undeniable truth. Behind him, a baby cried. A soft, tiny sound. It broke Tanaka. His jaw quivered. His eyes darted to the child, then to the Marines, then to Kanda. Finally, his shoulders sagged. He lowered the rifle. Not completely. Not willingly. But enough. Kanda stepped forward slowly, reached out, and wrapped his hand around the barrel. Tanaka didn't resist. Kanda lowered it gently toward the ground, carefully, deliberately, until the metal touched the dirt. The Marines exhaled for the first time in a full minute. Tanaka whispered, voice splintered and exhausted. I failed Japan. Kanda shook his head. No. You protected your people. Now let them live. Tanaka's knees buckled as he sank to the ground, covering his face with shaking hands, not out of shame, but release. The fight in the caves was finally over. But the war around them wasn't. And outside, on the far edge of the ridge, a Marine runner sprinted toward Captain Halsey, shouting breathlessly. Sir! Enemy reinforcements inbound, fast. Halsey spun around, eyes widening. They were out of time. Kanda had saved the civilians inside the caves. But now a new threat was coming straight for them. The runner's boots skidded across the dirt as he reached Halsey. 2 platoons, maybe more, sir. Coming from the eastern cliffs. The Marines tensed immediately, helmets snapping toward the tree line, rifles rising in unison. Kanda felt his stomach coil. He knew who they were. Straggler units, remnants of the Japanese forces who had escaped earlier bombardments. Fanatical. Desperate. And utterly unaware that hundreds of civilians had just surrendered peacefully. If they reached the caves first, it would all collapse. They'd accuse the civilians of betrayal. They'd drag women and children deeper into the tunnels. They'd force suicides. And they'd kill Kanda on sight. Halsey swore under his breath. Move flamethrowers to the left flank. Machine guns on the ridge. No one fires unless I order it. The Marines scrambled into position, dirt spraying, metal clattering, tension choking the air. Kanda's heart pounded. Not from fear for himself, but for the people behind him. He turned to the civilians, mothers clutching children, old men leaning on sticks, young boys with wide terrified eyes. They had just chosen life. Now life needed to protect them. Halsey barked. Kanda. Inside the ridge, get the civilians down the slope. We'll hold them off as long as we can. But Kanda didn't move. Instead, he stepped forward, toward the Marines' firing line. Halsey stared at him. What are you doing? Kanda swallowed hard. Let me speak to them. Halsey's eyes widened. You'll get yourself killed. Kanda shook his head. If Marines fire first, reinforcements will assume it's an ambush. They'll retaliate. Civilians will die. Everything we've done will be lost. His voice cracked. Sir, please. Halsey stared at him, this enemy pilot who had risked everything for strangers, and was willing to risk even more. After a long breath, Halsey stepped aside. God help you, he muttered. Go. Kanda walked toward the cliff edge, into the open. Into the danger. Into the line of fire. Marines held their breath. Civilians prayed. Even the jungle seemed to go silent. Then, through the trees, Japanese soldiers burst into view. Dirty. Exhausted. Rifles raised. Their squad leader shouted. Lieutenant Kanda. Why are you standing with the Americans? Kanda lifted both hands and shouted back. Lower your weapons. The battle here is over. The soldiers hesitated. Thunderous footsteps echoed behind them, more troops approaching. Kanda raised his voice, louder, sharper, commanding. There are civilians here. Women. Children. You will not die for nothing, and you will not take them with you. A stunned silence fell. The young Japanese corporal near the front lowered his rifle, just an inch. Lieutenant, is it true? Are we beaten? Kanda's voice softened. Yes. And there is no shame in living. The corporal's shoulders sagged. A single rifle clattered to the ground. Then another. Then another. Marines watched, stunned, as the Japanese reinforcements, one by one, began lowering their weapons. No ambush. No firefight. No bloodshed. Kanda stepped forward and bowed deeply. Choose life. The corporal bowed in return. It was over. The ridge held. The civilians were safe. For the first time since the invasion began, the island breathed. The sun was dipping low by the time the last rifle was laid on the ground. Smoke drifted softly over the ridge, not from fire, but from the extinguished flamethrowers the Marines never had to use. Hundreds of civilians were escorted down the slope, quietly, safely. Infants wrapped in blankets. Old women leaning on young Marines' arms. Fathers carrying sons who had not seen sunlight in days. For the first time since the invasion began. No one was running. No one was screaming. No one was dying. Lieutenant Masato Kanda stood at the edge of the ridge, watching them go, the very people he had risked everything to protect. Captain Halsey stepped beside him. "You saved them," he said. It wasn't praise. It was a simple, undeniable truth. Kanda didn't answer. He just bowed his head, not to a flag, not to a nation, but to life itself. Behind them, Japanese reinforcements sat quietly, staring at the Marines across from them. For a brief, impossible moment. Two enemies shared the same silence, the same exhaustion, the same relief. History rarely remembers the battles that didn't happen. It rarely speaks of the moments when a single man refuses the path others set for him, and chooses humanity instead. But on that ridge, for one day, a Japanese pilot surrendered alone, and saved 1,000 lives. As the final civilians disappeared safely down the valley, Kanda whispered something only the wind could hear. "Let this war end soon, before we lose the last of ourselves." The screen fades to black. A single line appears. Some victories are measured not in enemies defeated, but in lives spared. If you felt something in this story, if you want more untold World War II stories, hidden moments of humanity, and forgotten acts of courage, backhand index pointing right, hit that subscribe button. Backhand index pointing right, turn on notifications. Backhand index pointing right, and join us for the next mission into history. Because here, every story reminds us that even in the dark wars, there were still people who chose the light.